So again, this is recording this lecture now, and this is going to be an introduction to the Unity's interface. When you start Unity, you'll have basically they load up what's called the sample scene. In Unity, the gameplay space and your application runs in scenes. That's the terminology Unity is using. You will hear zones like Bethesda uses zones for their terminology, and id and Unreal use levels for their terminology. So it's the same. Basically, we're talking about when we talk about game, levels or scenes. Basically, we're talking about the gameplay space and everything that can be seen from it. And that's your definition of a level or a scene or any particular type of zone in your game. Everywhere that your player can be in game, and everything they can see from that space. So we're gonna again we start with the main camera and directional light, and again the directional light is like think the sun is basically the best way to describe the directional light, how it's being used in this particular. And then the main camera is basically basically the first camera in your scene. Now you can have other cameras, but they have to be only one has to be active at one time. I'll show you how to turn objects on and off in a moment. But we'll start with the main camera. And ideally, if when you start with a scene, you're probably going to go to 3D objects and start with a cube. And we'll use the cube for our floor. And you'll probably put this out, put it at 0, 0, 0. Actually, what you really want to do is put it at negative 0.5. Whatever your y value is, half of that, a negative value of half of that y value of the scale, that will put the floor at a 0 value for you. So since I've gone with one, so I'll go 100, 100, size of 1, and then half that size, because the pivot point of the cube is inside it, in the center of the cube. So we can see they do actually start with pivot. That's good. And then there's two coordinate systems you will be most concerned about. Global. Global means that this axis is never going to change its orientation. That this is the y. So in Unity, y is up. The blue is the z-axis, and that is the forward of your axis. All right. X is to your y. This is different from Unreal, where X is your forward and Z is up. Right? Unity uses what's basically is the screen coordinate system, and so basically this is if I bring this down, if I look at the axes where I look right on the Z-axis, you will see that this is going up. This is equivalent to your screen. Yep, it's kind of flipped. This is going up, and this is going to the right. So that's the orientation down the z-axis that our forward that we're dealing with. It's in line with our screen, and that's why Unity does it that way. Is it a pain behind to deal with at times? Yeah, you'll forget about it. You'll do it wrong, but you will fumble through and you'll get it right eventually. So don't worry. Moving around in the scene, I'm using the right mouse button and using WSAD. And you can use Shift to move faster. That's something that's not in Unreal. I know you're bringing that up, but yeah, this is a feature of Unity, not a feature of Unreal. So I'm using the mouse to use as a mouse look WSAD. Selecting with the left mouse button, so I can deselect and select. One of the things that so let's take a look at the main camera just quickly. There is one feature of the main camera I'm going to point out right now, and it's so Unity works where you have game objects. So main camera is an object. The directional light is an object. The cube is a game object. Your game objects consist of components that define components and other game objects that define the object. So for the main camera, it's a single game object with a transform. Every game object has a transform, and then it has the camera. It also has an audio listener. For right now, don't play with the audio listener. Only like if you've got if don't detach the audio listener unless you know what you're doing. So, but up here there are two properties that we're going to look at right away. Um, is clear flags. Basically, how do I clear the background on my screen? And Unity defaults to the skybox, and you've seen this, and you've seen horrible Unity applications use this skybox. First thing you want to do is move this rather than skybox, go to solid color. Don't clear, don't use definitely. These will do wacky things, but you want to use solid color and go to black for our purposes. Now, this in the scene hasn't changed. But if we look at our game view, then you will see that our background has changed here, and this is what we'll see in game. So this is one of the first things is that there are two ways to look at what's in your scene. There is the game view. This is what you would see in terms of like through your game, and there is the scene view, which is basically think of this: you working your scene view, and your game view is what your game like what you would play in terms of your game. There are three buttons right here. There is a pause, play button, a pause button, and then a step forward. So the step makes no sense unless you are paused already. So we will just press play, and again, right now, all that I've got is just my world, and it goes automatically to the game view. Now you can do things in the scene view. The problem is when you stop, the changes you make won't keep. So make sure you're doing your work while the game is not being simulated. There is one other thing to look at is projection, and it's based on you can do perspective or orthographic. We'll stay with perspective for this week, but later on we'll look at the orthographic version of this. And basically we've got what is the FOV axis and field of view. When we go to orthographic, basically it's like how big is the camera. Orthographic is a flat. It's basically your objects are being rendered flat and not with perspective. Play with it as you see fit, but right now, for the most part, stay with perspective for right now. We will use orthographic in a couple of different things, but right now, for our purposes, we'll stay with perspective. So that's our camera in a nutshell. Again, directional light. So we have basically think of that in a directional light. There is a point in infinite distance away, and the light is streaming in on an angle based on its rotation. You can change its color by clicking here. You can change its intensity, and there are reasons to change its intensity. Does it cast shadows? So there's other things that you can play with in terms of the directional light. For now, we've got this cream sunlight color coming from the directional light, so you won't, for our purpose this week, you won't really need to touch the directional light. Again, finally, we threw in the cube. We created it. We clicked right-click in here and use 3D object. So there's cube. You can create spheres, capsules, cylinders, planes, and quads. There are some other pieces here. I wouldn't play with anything else at the moment. Just play with these things. The plane is basically just a flat, think of it like a piece of paper, but only one side of the piece of paper. And a quad is similar to that extent. You wouldn't necessarily use these unless you had a particular purpose for them. For the most part, you're going to be using these to build things, or you'll be using the mesh objects to build things. There is a way to what we call create an empty game object. And when you create an empty game object, and this is going to be, we'll call this world for the sake of argument right now. And all it is right now is basically a point in space. And I need to set that to 0, 0, 0. And so get used to typing in 0, 0, 0 for position rotation and ones across the board to scale to clear things out. Again, it created it And you'll see that Unity will create objects in weird places. Move them to where they need to be. Move your game again with these empty game objects. These are great for creating like folder-like structures. Like with the world, I can move like the cube. Move that underneath this cube. And now the cube is a child of the world. Let's say for some reason I wanted to move the world. Oh, there it is. I got to do a bigger movement. So you can see that while I'm moving the world object, cube is going to stay relative to where that world object is. And this is the parenting. And by doing this parenting structure, we can do a lot of things. In theory, the other thing that we'd want to do is, again, I have a prefab folder created. I can, in theory, go in and take a copy of the world object and drag it into here. And I can, drag it out. And this is not necessarily what you wanted to do, but you can see that now that I've created what I've created is called a prefab. So it's a collection of game objects. This is how we will be using these prefabs to spawn things in, and a bunch of many things. So this structural piece of how we work with a prefab is going to be very important. And then once I've created the prefab, I can just drag these in. Again, I made this door structure in the last class, and I can drag that in, and there we go. It consists of the doorway, and then there's two model in here. See, this is actually another uh, another empty game object with the model actually right here. So I'm going to delete these because I don't need these in the scene. You can always go right click if you don't want. You can always go to prefab. You can unpack it or unpack completely. And you probably most of the time you'd want to unpack it completely. Unpack is just I want to delete. I want to unpack the top level of the game object prefab. And then if there are any other prefabs underneath, I'm going to leave those as prefabs. When I use unpack completely, everything and all my children were no longer a prefab in any shape or form. So that's a lot of what we're going to do right now is going to be like if we want to make changes, we'll use unpack completely. And I can go down to my assets folder right here. I can delete this. So a couple things, hierarchy tab right here. This is everything that's in my scene. And as we are running the application, it will show you, like if we spawn objects into the scene, it'll show those new objects spawned to the scene. Inspector tab. This is basically this information about the object that, again, let me click on world. There's only one piece here. But here it is. I've got the mesh filter, mesh render. So the mesh filter, mesh render is the visual component of an object, and a collider is the physical. Think of it as the physical collision portion of an object. This will also apply to triggers later on when we start using them. But again, your game object consists of components that define the object. Or it consists of multiple objects. It's one game object with children game objects that have different components to do what they need to do. And this is where this can get very complex, but it's very robust at the same time. We will talk more about when we start using these complex game objects. There's issues that arise with it, and there's actually slides and lecture pieces in the next few weeks about that. So I'm not going to. I just want you to know that you can do this, and that there's more. When we do this, there are things that we have to take into account when we write our code, and that's something that's coming down the line in a few weeks. You can rename an object. So this object right here is cube. This is basically I can rename it here. I could have gone right here and used rename as well. Right-clicked on the object, rename. You can duplicate, Control D. You can also delete from this menu as well, and delete. If I wanted to remove it, to disable an object, I can turn off this check click, and you can see that my floor has now disappeared. So this object is not enabled, is basically what it is. I'm going to re-enable the object, so because we want this as our floor, obviously. I'm going to put our world back to 0, 0, 0. Good. Okay. Let's go to materials. And I'm going to, again, I've shown you, let me see. Yeah. So I'm going to make a new material, and I'm just call this color flat color example. And I'm basically going to go up here to the albedo and click on this box here for the color. And I'm just going to say this is going to be yellow for the sake of argument. And I can, once I've done that, my material, I can drag this into objects in the scene. So now my world is green. I'm actually, yellow, I should say. I'm going to use this green instead. There's a folder here for textures. I actually did make all these textures. That's interesting. I'm going to bring in two materials, and they're just two materials I just happen to have on my desktop. So here is and I'm just dragging the image. So this was a PNG. So here's the hover code PNG, and this is so these were things. So I've downloaded a download. So this is a poster for an event from last year, and this is a QR code that points to our YouTube channel essentially. So one of the things you can do with a texture, you can just drag it onto an object. It's going to make a new material folder, and in there, this is the actual material. So when you go up, you can see that here is what that material was. I'm going to go back to, and I'm going to do the same thing with this one. And for this material, basically, it is black outline. So again, this is what the materials that you're actually using. One of the things is that right now, this material, this black area, it doesn't actually have any data. It's actually transparent here. And so what we want is either go to cutout, or we wanted to go to not fade would have worked, and transparent. Transparent doesn't necessarily always work. Albedo alpha. No, it's not working. We really wanted cutout is what we really wanted. And so we've got this material, and it's now cut out. You know, the alpha that is actually not there is now showing up. Now, again, this is a huge material on everything. So I'm just going to go back and I'm just going to apply green back to it because this is, again, it's supposed to be my floor. It's supposed to be like my grass. When we look at the materials that were created, you can see that under the albedo, the texture showed up here, and you can click here, right click. Sorry, you hit that little. So there's a little button in front of the A. You want to click that button, and it's going to bring up this select texture, and then you can see here's everything that I have applied to my. And there's other things as background. There's other materials that have been given here. UI sprite, UI mask. These are things that are in other packages that are available to you. The default UI stuff is what these guys are. Drop down, check mark, background. These are default stuff for UI. But like these yellows, the white, the stone wall. This is from the marble. Red, purple, red, lime green, green, gray, brown. These are all materials that textures that I've created and imported in. I'm not sure why, because the next thing I give you is a different set of these where they're basically created as pure materials in Unity without these assets. But these, if I wanted to, let's go back to again this object, this material, I should say. If I wanted one of the like lime green instead, I just changed the texture that it's pointing to. I'm actually going to go back to where is it? Back here, because that's what this material is. And I go back to my materials folder and back to lime green. Okay, so materials in a nutshell. All right. You don't necessarily. I mean, if you don't make any materials, go right ahead. That's perfectly fine. Um, More likely than not, you are going to troll me with materials.
I won't.
No, you're going to troll. No, no. Don't tell me you're not going to troll me with materials. No, no. You are denying yourself of fun by saying that.
Why like the?
Yeah, but I'm like the chaos, and that's part of the chaos that happens.
Okay, got you.
I've been. Don't get me wrong. You troll me, I will troll you back harder. That's the problem that you face with me. And I've been around the internet pretty much since it was invented. So I know more memes than you do, and I can pull those old memes out of the hat if I need to.
Well, now I want to see them.
Well, now I don't want to troll you.
Yeah, no, yeah. See, now you don't want to troll me. I mean, it's a fine line. What can you get away with? So, anyways, moving on. So let's talk about objects. Again, we created objects in the world. Again, I can go in and create a 3D object, and I can do I can create I'll create a sphere, and I'm going to make this put this back to 0, 0, 0, just so you know. So again, these objects, the pivot point of the object is the center, and you can see that we've got this again the gizmo here. Blue is forward, red is the right, green is up. So Q is basically select is move the camera around and it's select different. It's more okay. This is the move can the camera around. Next one that's W. It's the move tool. So you can grab one of the you can grab the one of the arrows. They've got two planes here. So this is going to move me on the Y and Z axis. And if you try and Unity's not as good as the others. In theory, you can grab all three, move. For the most part, you're going to grab an arrow, move the arrow, and move it in the desired way you want. Let's rotate this 45 degrees. And if I go from global, if I go to local, this is relative. So this is the axis relative to how it's rotated. So like if I like this is my face, I'm pointing down this way. If I rotate, my local forward is still forward where I'm facing. So think of it like that. Like if you just rotate, the where you're facing, that's your forward direction. So in this case, this is and because I'm on the 45, I'm bring it up. You can see that I can move on a diagonal nicely. So if you've got the object pointed in the direction you want, you can just use that arrow. And later we will refer to this arrow in code. Um, and so we can refer to the arrow locally in code, and there's a way to refer to the global axis in code. And we'll talk about that. I think in 2 weeks we start talking about these axes. But I actually don't want a rotation. I'll say 0, 1, 0. One of the other thing I'll do is I'm going to create a 3D object, and I'm going to create a cylinder. And we'll put this at 0, 0, 0. And again, the cylinder is basically in the middle of the object. While this is a Y of 1, it's actually a scale up 1 and down 1. So if I do a Y of 1, it will set on the base of my world. Bring the sphere up to 2, and then I'm going to make this 3, 3, 3. And now I've made essentially the lollipop popsicle tree. So it's consisting of a sphere and a cylinder. Again, I'll just create an empty game object. And again, this we know this. I want this at 0, 0, 0 at the pivot point, and I'll call this not game object but tree prefab, and I'll give it the dark green and the brown, and I'll take these two objects, and I will click and drag them to the parent. Again, the phrase is you take, when you're parenting objects, you take the child object kicking and screaming to its parent. So here is the tree prefab. I'll go back to my assets, and I'll drop the tree fab in here, and I can now just drop this into the world. I will actually take the tree prefab, and I'm actually going to unpack it. Prefab, unpack completely. I'm actually going to get rid of the sphere in this case, and then I want to click on the tree prefab. I'm going to go right click, 3D object, and I'm going to do I not have a cone? Oh yeah, cone is not one of the primitives. So in my case, I'm going to go back to my models, and did I not give you a cone?
You're gonna have to bust out Blender.
Or 3ds Max. Okay, so I haven't given you a prefab for a cone. So we're gonna make a funky. So I'm gonna grab the house. I'm gonna make it part of the tree prefab. And I'm gonna make this 1, 1, 1. Bring this up here. It does. Go get materials. I'm gonna make this. Make that green. So I'm gonna actually unpack, just to be on the safe side. Just unpack the object, and then I'm gonna go basically to the prefab, and I'm gonna call this square square pine prefab. Yeah, I was supposed to make I was trying to make a pine tree using a cone, and I forgot I've not given you a cone object. And then now I'm going to go back to my asset, the folder for my prefabs, and I'm going to drag this into there. And now I have this oddly looking pine tree that I'm calling a pine tree for our purposes. So remember that I had earlier downloaded two packages, and there's a models package and a player's prefab package, and I've updated the player prefab package again to reflect Unity 6. Um, the model brought in, I believe, the models and the materials folder, and then there's the player prefabs. To use, basically, you've got two folders in here, one for the scripts and one for the materials. All you need to do is grab one of these two objects. These are the prefabs. So this is the first-person shooter prefab, and for his uses, we do need to move them up one on the Y, so they're not in the middle of the ground. Now if I press play, it's going to yell. Hold on a sec. I need to get rid of the main camera because this controller has a camera itself, so we don't need the main camera anymore. We're using these prefabs. So just be mindful that your camera may be connected to another object. Actually, the other thing I could have done is I could have just disabled the main camera, the object called main camera, and I'm just gonna, I'll press play, and you can see here is my first-person shooter object, and don't get me wrong, this is not a great first-person shooter controller, and it's written poorly, very on purpose, so you don't use this in other assignments. Can you look at what's going on here and read it and might glean some ideas of what you can do? Sure. but it's not built well. There are things that you would want to do with this controller. In fact, Unity has a better player controller for this type of character um, built in elsewhere. But we're gonna not necessarily use that. I'm gonna get rid of the first-person controller character now, and I'm gonna bring in the marble. And again, I'm gonna bring it up to 0.5, so it's not in the ground. And I'll press play, and I'm just gonna. You can see that. And again, this is not like one of the best marble controllers ever. It's very touchy, is the best way to describe it. Um, it should have moved around but it does the job for what we're doing this week. That's the most important thing. It's doing the job. So and I'm pointing these two prefabs out because and I'll stop it. Because ultimately you're going to be using one of these prefabs and build out level for the object. So for a first-person shooter, that is your typical level that you would I've got stuff set into the ground. For the marble, looking at games like Marble Madness to Super Monkey Ball and games such and Rock of Ages. These are the three big marble games historically that I can think of off the top of my head. There's others, but those are the three that are worth looking at in terms of design ideas. Rock of Ages is from what they're from Chile, and Rock of Ages basically is you are a marble going through classical paintings and classical painting styles, and it's silly. Yeah, this is that's Ace Team. Ace Team is a very interesting. They're a very interesting studio. Very interesting projects they've made over the years. So I'm gonna go into the models right now. I'm gonna bring in. I'll bring in the ramp. I'm gonna bring in the big house. So this is coming in at like a 2.54. So this is converted from, I think from inches to centimeters is what's going on here. So a conversion that the FBX export wanted to do. I mean, you can scale this as you see fit. Here's a box. This is supposed to be a one by one by box, but this is coming in oddly. And so now, and you can see that I'm going to type in values for my object. And you can see this is now sitting on the grid nicely. And this box particularly is sitting on the grid on its middle of the bottom of the box. And I'm going to go 25, -4. And you can see that this is sitting on the grid nicely as well when I brought this down to a one by one by one. Yeah, so I'm not scaled in odd ways. Again, I'm going to bring this one by one by one. 9, -15. There we go. So I'm going to put this over here. There is where is it? If you click this right here, this will turn on snapping on the grid. And if you pull this down, this will bring up information. Snap to grid, rotation. So basically, rotate basically is how much of so this is the grid size. So one is in Unity, one unit is about 1 meter. Is how you would want to think about it. I believe it's 1 meter. It's either if I'm wrong, then it's 1 centimeter. Scale is up to you. Is ultimately is what I have to say. Sometimes 1 meter is what you want. Other cases, 1 centimeter may be what you really want instead. It's about detail. If you're making spaceship games, then 1 unit will probably be approximately 1 meter. Rotation is basically how much is going to snap when you rotate it. So 15 degrees, essentially. All right, I'm going to leave that right now. So let me turn that off. I'm going to press play. And again, the one thing about these objects right here is I'm going right through them. And that's because there's no collision. Again, I'm going to go over to one of my trees and try and hit it. There you go. So there you go. I've just hit one of the trees and I've stopped. Yeah, and that's part of the physics system, the default physics system. All right, so let's talk about collision. Basically, collision is a component. So we'll just go and add component. And I've typed in collider. You can go COL, and that would work as well for collision. All right, I'm going to start with the box right here, and I'm going to add a box collider because that makes sense for it. And it will come in roughly the size of my object. The house, I'm actually going to do a box collider as well. You can see that it's going to orientate itself around. And while this is not perfect to the object, this is, for our purposes, for our marble game at the moment, that's perfectly fine because we're going to ram into this bottom side down here. Now for the ramp, we can, again, I'll add component, I'll do box collider. You can see that I've got half of the ramp. The box is going to take up more space than it should. We can right click the three buttons right here, and we can use remove component. So for our purposes, when we're dealing with colliders, there are two physics systems in Unity. There is the standard 3D system, and there is the 2D system. They don't work together whatsoever, just so you know. So we've got the box collider, the capsule collider, and this is for cylinders are going to fall under that. Not circle. The sphere collider, and then there's a terrain collider for terrain objects. What we want is what's called a mesh collider. And the mesh collider is basically going to use the object's mesh itself as a copy of the mesh as a collider. As your models get bigger and more complex, this becomes extremely expensive. So like your cinematic model or your player model, not using a mesh collider. Depending on your game, you actually might be using multiple colliders. But like, let's say all we concerned about is generic player collider. Like we go back to the FPS collider, FPS player, we'll see that the collider, we're using a capsule collider for the player. Historically, we are using a cylinder. We've gone from a cylinder to using capsules. And the reason for capsules is that the collider has a flat bottom. Cylinder has a flat bottom, and basically the capsule basically takes a sphere and cuts it in half and welds it to the top and bottom of the cylinder. And what that does is that we can move around objects smoothly. If we hit an incline, we don't stop on it. We can slide up that incline easily, and that's a property of the sphere in play. So going back to this object right here, it is just a cube cut in half. It is very simple object. So we can get away with a mesh collider here. Now that I've done the colliders, I will press save my scene, Control S. I'll press play, and I will go over. You can see that I've gone up the ramp. Gone into this. These guys now have colliders. Collision is active. And I need to acceleration. So it's a little more better control. Still touchy, and that's something we won't be able to fix easily without. There's a lot of code that we could write to improve this object. But for our purpose right now, it's doing what we want, and it's just it's good enough for demonstration purposes. So, so I've shown you how to create materials. I've shown you how to create prefabs. Well, I'll show you how you can update prefabs later on. That'll be another lecture. Showing you like, hey, here's how to use each of the prefabs that are given to you, and then ultimately like, hey, I've thrown stuff into the world. I've created prefabs for stuff in the world. I'm not looking for big level level designer material. This is not a level designer class. And if it was, we would talk. The way I'd be talking to you would be very different. What the focus is that I'm asking is, can you learn enough about Unity that you can build a simple level, that you can build something that you can test and run? Because that's going to make you an effective programmer. Is that you can turn around and grab something, throw it in the game, and get it up and running. It means you don't have to turn around and ask a level designer to do work for you or an artist to do something for you. You can just get something up in game, run with it, and then later replace what you need, replace things that you need with other assets. You can always make a game look pretty. As long as you've got gameplay, you can improve the looks of the gameplay. Or remaster the game for most cases. Or not make the game look better in some cases for a couple of remasters. Don't know why that has got to happen. But anyways. I've shown you basically the different pieces. A couple things again. Tabs can be moved around. Like here's the animator. I can drag this and put this over here with the inspector. This makes no sense that what I've just done. What the animator tab is, don't worry right now. This is later on when you're working with actual animations. Actually, you can close the tab. You can go to Windows. You can get under layout. Where is it? Other windows right here. So there's general, scene, game, inspector hiring, project, console. Later on, like here's the project window. I've shown you, I've gone over briefly. This is where your asset's going to be. This is where you're going to drag things in to add. Next to it is the console. And this is basically, as later on as we do debug messages, you'll see them here in the console. The hierarchy tab is here. Inspector tab here, so your properties of an individual game object here. Again, you can click this to lock the inspector tab, and this is great if you've got to assign things to an object. You'll want to lock the object down and then not worry while you go through the project folder or pick things out of the hierarchy tab. I talked about the collider. This marble has what's called a rigid body. This basically says I'm a physics object. Now this is a physics object that is just by adding a rigid body, you can make an object a physics object. In here, the rigid body is being used to run the controller script right here. Is using the rigid body to move the object around. So it's not just a physics object in this case. It's a little more than that. Here is a script, another component, and this was actually, I believe, if I didn't write it, I know who wrote it. But this is a script that basically adds the capability of when the game runs for you to get input, move the object around, and it's got some different parameters you can play with. Things you can, there is a show debug, so there's debug messages. I think I can click this on, and it will show you debug information. I keep it off because it's actually pretty spammy. It's updating that almost every frame. Um, if I open up you can see that the marble controller consists of the marble model. Here's the camera anchor, and then there's the marble camera itself. Bring this out a little bit. So we go back to the controller prefab. Camera control knows where its anchor is and knows where the marble is because it's doing things to those objects. So scripts can refer to other objects, and we'll see that in action in the next 2 weeks. These are all public variables that we can affect and change and to affect the behavior of the object. And this is how we set these variables up is actually very easy, and that's something we'll see this next week when we start scripting. You'll make a basic movement script, and that script has a parameter for what direction and how fast are we going. You'll make a spin script, and again, you'll ask for a vector of what axis are we spinning on and how fast are we spinning. And we've got things, we can do integers, we can do floats, we can do, here's a vector 2, here's a boolean, we can do a vector 3. And I'll go through what those are in a little more detail when we start talking about scripting. All right, I think I've gone over a lot of this been seeding a lot of things with things I've been saying, but I've gone over the basics of what you need to do for what we're doing in class. Again, you can go and and we'll say you wanted to duplicate an object. There is right-click and duplicate, and it's going to duplicate in place. So I'm going to grab that arrow. You can see that there is my other object. The other thing you can do is you can click on an object, you can do copy and paste it right into place. You can see there is another object here. I'll paste it again, and it's going to paste it in place where it was. Paste it again, and I'll move this one over here. Again, I've created a world object, and you can use that as a folder, essentially, where you can parent that. So let's take all my tree prefabs. I'll parent them to the world. And I can literally go into the world and turn off the world, and that will turn off its children as well. So if the parent's not enabled, the children are not enabled. Whether or not right now you can see it has a checkbox because that's its default state if the world was enabled. So that's a feature of Unity that we will play with. We will turn on and off objects, particularly with UI stuff. There's a lot of we'll turn stuff on and off, or we'll turn it on and slide it into place, or various things. Are there any questions about what your first lab assignment is? Anything that you want me to go over one more time?
Can you do the prefab again?
Yeah, basically. So let's take this tree prefab, and I'm going to unpack it just so I can remake it in some other way. And I'm going to use and I'm going to say for our purposes, this happens. This tree is going to be yellow and green for some reason. I'll do the dark green so it stands out. So this is going to be a new tree prefab. This is going to be I'll call it marble tree prefab. I'll explain why I'm using the term marble another day. And so basically, where I'm keeping the object is going to be in this prefab folder. So basically, I'm going to take the root object, which is the tree prefab, and I'm going to just drag it into the asset window. And that's going to create a new prefab object in here. You can see the object, and then now that I've made it a tree prefab, one of the things I can do is I can just drag these out into the scene to use. Did I answer your question? Later on, when we spawn things, we will be spawning using a prefab object. And when we'll assign things, they'll be using objects out of these type of object, these prefabs, to spawn things into the world. But when we get there, that's a few weeks off, but that's another purpose of the prefabs and why they're important right now. Any other questions? Any other comments you want on video, on YouTube?
So here's the
Hold on. What was the question?
YouTube. It's gonna be on YouTube.
Yes. Yeah. Soon as I'm done, as soon as I stop recording, the first thing I'm gonna do is upload it to YouTube.
Okay.
On NCTC Game Development, yes?
Yep.
In that case,
And if you are not part of the Discord, you need to join Discord now, because basically all of the lectures that I do, I post into there's a channel in Discord where I post the lecture.
in that case, could you tell everyone watching to like, comment, and subscribe?
No, because this is not that type of video.
Aw, man.
We are not sponsored by some
YouTube.
financial force. We are not sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. We are not sponsored by NordVPN.
This is not for money.
No, we are a non-profit institution, so we don't need that type of monetization things. Yeah, I turn all that off anyways. Any other questions?
Can you show the collision from the player point of view? The FPS point of view?
What do you mean by the FPS?
So not the marble, but the other.
Use the other. So let me delete the prefab, and we'll go to the player prefab folder. So I'll bring this in. So I'm gonna run. So here I go. I'm gonna. This is what you're asking?
Yeah. That was
Okay. Yeah. It's same. It's again. This I'm hitting. So the tree itself, the green part of this object doesn't have collision. Only the cylinder does. So that's something to. Thank you for pointing it out, because if I go up, I'm not going to hit the cylinder because the sphere is going to get in the way because it has collision. Here's the ramp. Oof. Again, the how you do jumps and all gravity is not. I haven't done any of that code whatsoever, so this is just give you an idea of like. Again, not why are you've been given this so that you don't use this in other projects, because as such these are unless you went in and did a huge amount of work to improve them. Any other questions? Anything want to demonstrate it again? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording right now and upload this to YouTube.